Thank you to Raqs Media Collective for joining me for this conversation we are having on the Shanghai Biennale. I would like to start with asking you to develop about the ideas behind this biennial. How did you came up with a concept and then a structure?
We started with series of sources.
Yeah.
So sources which we drew from our own reading from within our interest in the history of cinema and history of science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And from there we drew a set of sources to one significant film that we thought would be important, and one book that had been with us for a year and a half now.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, those two sources, we started then teasing out series of possibilities of how do we create a movement between artworks and series of positions and itineraries of artistic practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started drawing a relational map, or not a relational map so much, a series of diagrams, a series of movement images, and series of staging of time that could envelop over a period of time. And so this slowly became a form.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started interrupting that form through ideas like infra, curatorial, through ideas like theory opera, and then persona, to extend and keep it interrupted, grow and extend. And slowly over a period of time gave it a kind of a conceptual turn, a conceptual language, a conceptual turn. So in the sense that it was not concept searching form, it was basically like an artistic practice, form surprising us and building a possibility of new conceptual grounds, that again pushing us in search of new forms. So it was imbricated movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as we've talked about this a little bit before, the question of attitude, right? How do you approach something? How is something to be looked at as much as what it is doing and what form it might have, but being able to look at the work and the very idea of an exhibition itself as opening out the attitude question. So that is why the exhibition is called Why Not Ask Again?
Mm-hmm.
It is, repetition is not reiteration, or so it is possible to by asking again, possibly opening out new things. But it is that attitude of being willing to ask again, amongst other things. So the sort of centering also the how question at the heart of what we see the biennial to be.
Also, perhaps going back to the two sources that Jeebesh described.
Yeah, I wanted to ask.
One is a novel, a science fiction novel by a Chinese writer, Cixin Liu, called The Three-Body Problem, which interested us because of the way in which it related concrete historical time with larger questions of the destiny of the universe. And the film was Jukti Tokkor Goppo, a Bengali film by Ritwik Ghatak in 1974, which brought together personal biography, a picaresque philosophical journey, as well as larger historical questions. The title of the film sort of translates as reasons, arguments, and stories. So we have also said maneuvers, arguments,
counter arguments, and
stories. Basically, we were looking at triangulation between reason, the narrative. How does storytelling impact upon the asking of questions? How does that inflect imagination? We're looking for these triangles in all the things that we would do in this biennial, and which also reflected the mode in which we work within ourselves.
No, the thing is that if you think about the single, then it is the individual, or the singular, and then when you have two, you have the binary situation. And I think for us, not only as a collectivity, but also otherwise, the moment you bring the third element in, a third possibility in, it becomes the multitude. You have the beginning of the many. And triangulation is also a great word because it is actually the method by which you find your way by looking at the relationship between stars and land. So for us, it's sort of the fact that you make things not singular and not binary, but you open out the possibility of there being many directions, many questions, many, in that sense, many possibilities.
This reflects into the not only in the structure but also in the reality of the biennial, because this is a very particular one, as we were saying. I mean, also the context is a pretty peculiar one. How did you address questions to the context, and what were the answers that you got back?
I think the context is anywhere in the world, but especially in a city like Shanghai, you are really foregrounded and thrown into the conditions of a complex, turbulent world of capitalism, of the way in which desires are processed, of the way in which value shrinks or expands, and of the way in which hopes, fears, and anxieties get circulated in today's world. That is the context everywhere. But a place like Shanghai, in a sense, is a prism through which this context gets refracted in a very particular and sharp and pointed way. So naturally, the biennial was present and resident in today's world, but also in some ways anticipating other possibilities of time, anticipating other futurities, anticipating tangential ways of being in relation to the current context. So sometimes contemporaneity can be a bit of a trap where you are constantly confined to the question of what is the current topic. Whereas we were, I think, reading contemporaneity also as a way of advancing a mode of being in time. So not just responding to the nature of the world as it is today, but also offering back a certain kind of response of a greater imaginative plenitude.
Yeah.
So, one of the things is art itself, in its mobilization in a certain concentrated form, is the context. So for us, Biennale has become a context within context within context. The reason is that art produces that intensity of becoming something that then creates the possibility of refracting other realities, other imaginations through it. So our primary focus was, how can we create that concentration?
Yeah.
That possibility, that specificity of that concentration was something that we were always geared towards. That, like in any artistic practice you would do, like in even a literary practice or any other practice you would do, like what is exactly in the discipline that you are in, how much that you can weigh in and transform the location with that. So in a sense that the Biennale always addresses the whole world question again and again. So for us, Biennale is a significant event because it keeps on making a world question appear, reappear, again reappear, and art becomes its context. So for us, we approach the whole Biennale like that. So for the artists were centered to that asking of that context. What is artistic practice today doing? What is the kind of forces it is trying to access and trying to bring out in some sense in our sense of the world? So that sensing of the world has to be sensed with specific intensity in the. So that was one of our, how do you call it? One of our impulse, growing impulse in moving, talking, working with artists. That has been something that drove us.
Do you want to talk about a particular work?
Another thing that what we tried in this Biennale was to make it impossible to talk about a particular work.
Okay.
And continuously draw in works, drawing in other works, drawing in other works, drawing in other, in a kind of a infinite possibility of. So if you move and turn your body from one work towards another work, that is becoming very difficult for us to shoot and make the third book. Is this which angle you turn, and the logic of the work should change. So if you take the foyer, the lobby, which is a huge, it's all of PSA, height of 27 meters. It stages a set of 5-6 works together. One is Sunyan and Penyu, which is these 3 crops being pulled together.
Pulled apart by forklifts, but kept together by vacuum.
So this is 2 forces that
opposing
forces acting to create a moment of contingent stability, but that stability can break into infinite other directions. And then behind it there is Peter Pillar, where you have the series of, he worked in archive for 25 years of regional photographs of newspapers, where he discovered a group of 32 photographs of people looking into manholes.
No, just holes.
Just holes on the earth.
Yeah,
on the earth.
In earth.
So it is just holes which are very dark, and a group of people very seriously looking at those holes. I think it's one of the most the humorous work in the show.
Both very serious and both very funny.
Very, very funny. And next to it you have Lee Ming-wei, dancer, dancing with grain. Mm-hmm. So it is extremely fragile, things coming together. As the dancer does, people form circles around them. The circle shrinks and expands according to the movement of the dancer. So it's and it's very primary material of the grain that is being. And then facing them is Muge's three bodies of
these figures, which are humanoid figures that could be made of vegetal material, but are possibly also creatures from another landscape entirely, who are kind of permanent viewers or watchers of the dance and of this interplay of forces. So what you create is this sort of simultaneity that the dance will happen even as forces pull against each other. How does one sustain the kind of, like the dancers, Ming-wei is sort of distinct with the dancers, is that you are speaking your dances with the grain. The grain will tell you how to move after this.
So, and then you look ahead and you look at straight, there is a pendulum moving in its own rhythm. It is not a rhythm that it follows.
Dancer, but they speak to each other.
Speaks to each other. And then
Mariola indictments.
And then you suddenly turn and you realize a face looking at you, with the eye and the face, and Miss Christian Thompson's work. And to the left of it, you see a stroboscope environment where you actually totally disoriented to your perceptual abilities. What are the edges of your perception is brought to question. This is
like the first kind of orbit. What we began to call for ourselves also orbits. Mm-hmm. What we created was, like, what is interesting about orbit, and this is also important because the name of the book, anyway, we'll talk about that later, the source book that we were talking about. Gravity acts on all things, right? An orbit is constructed, a certain path is constructed because of the interrelationship between one and another. Mm-hmm. So you create, that's how an orbit gets formed. So we were looking at the idea of creating orbits that people could follow. They don't have to follow, but when you look at the guidebook, you see a certain orbit. The whole layout is there, but you see a certain orbit. Because, at least for us, it's a kind of presentation of possible ways of maneuvering through the space. Uh-huh. Not as a sequentiality. It's not about linearity or sequentiality or even about Bach. Anyone who experiences the exhibition will make that. But through an orbit, we're also opening up, because the other thing, the name of this novel that Shuddhabrata told you about, can do. It also talks about in physics that when you have three bodies acting on each other gravitationally, things become unpredictable. Mm-hmm. So then the orbit also sort of allows that sense of unpredictability that that there's no predictable conclusions necessarily. Just because you go through one orbit, you will make different conclusions or different heuristic points. Different points of departure can happen for anyone experiencing it as an orbit. So in that sense, the exhibition does not play with sequentiality in that sense at all.
No, like there is a whole room between us we call it the room or the revolt of the sediments. Mm-hmm. Basically, you enter and you see a huge rock and a light moving around. It's Lao's work, and behind that you see a fossil record
playing. A record of fossil
playing, and behind that you see a huge pit landscape being dug out, and before that a tree with many sickles, a dead tree with many sickles, just waiting between rest and work, and a repose. Could be potential for a rebellion, or for withdrawal, or for a renewal, or for a next day, a repetition. So this kind of landscape try to produce through this movement. So when you're looking at a fossil record, you're also looking at the deep time, but also the deep time as a time of being excavated for economic life of our present hydrocarbon-driven economic life. But also in that there's interruptions of withdrawal that can happen. So this kind of continuous flows, but this is not something that conceptually we mapped it.
Mm-hmm.
It is something we sensed in the work. We sensed in large number of work that was coming our way, and the way the artists were speaking about the work. A lot of the works we had not even seen before it was installed,
Mm-hmm.
because there were a lot of new commissions. So the idea was that those conversations gave us a sense that, look, this is the way that they're sensing and they're making us move with the work. Mm-hmm. And we just kept ourselves with that. And the layout and the way the exhibition is structured is that sense of moving with this kind of feeling that we felt. It at one level intuitive and one level being open to the fabulous, that okay, the stories will take over. And one level being very sure about arguments being continuously posed and cutting each other, countering each other.
Mm-hmm. Arguments and counter-arguments.
Continuously, that nothing is affirmed with each other. Mm-hmm. They are pushing each other.
Yeah, so this gives them the movement between all the works, I imagine. Okay, so so the exhibition is a kind of catalyzer system for all these energies and interactions to happen, if I got it right.
Yes. Well, you said it very nicely. We can repeat it again.
So I guess the research phase was very much important. Also, I mean, the first contacts you got with the artists, some of them you knew from a long time, I guess, and some others not. You had new commissions and some existing works.
But I just want to say one thing about the research process. I mean, the most travel we did, and the most, in that sense, finding out in a way that we did was actually within China.
Uh-huh.
We went to Shanghai, of course, but to Beijing many times, of course, but also to Beijing and Guangzhou and Hangzhou
and then the Tiang travel.
And then another colleague, one of the collegiate members traveled. But I think the reason I'm saying that is because it was very important for us that it wasn't that we saw the exhibition not as something that is bringing something that we like to Shanghai, but the question is what kind of exhibition do you make when you're standing here and looking out?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, oh, this is what we think is good work and we should take it, no matter how strongly it might speak to us. Let's take it to Shanghai. It's like when you are here in this milieu, like in this world, and you try and find out more about the textures of that world, then what is it that is... So it's a relationship with it was more as I would say, more looking out than bringing in. That distinction. And the rest of the research, as you pointed out, some people you know well, some people you've shown with before, some people are...
But Monica, one of the things that I think we have discovered in this process, and because in Manifesta we almost knew no artists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here we had a group of people, only 5, whom we have worked with before. But our curatorial method was not concentric circles, that here is a group of people we are very confident of, and then we build another from the region, and then another from the work that we have selected, we like. It was not based on that logic. Mm-hmm. It was based on a much more spread out lateral logic in which works pulling other works. Sense that if Sunyan and Pengu's work was like, Monica went visited the studio in January, very early on, and this work was something that she discussed and saw a preliminary work on. That shaped the way we started looking at the lobby and the way that the kind of force field that this work generates and what kind of counter subtle moves that we have to make to push the reading of this work to another terrain than the work is proposing. Mm-hmm. So that's the curatorial work. The artist is proposing a terrain to be read in. We are proposing a further pushing of that terrain to another terrain by work from another sensibility, another itinerary. So this is the kind of moves that we were continuously trying to build into the... So it was a very slow, meandering process.
I wanted to ask you, what did you discover about Shanghai and China in general during this experience? Is this something that really impressed you in terms of artistic reflection, and something that was really important for you to consider during this experience, curatorial experience?
I think we discovered, and we were quite clear what we were looking for, and was also a different sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cliche about contemporary Chinese art, is that it is big, it is brash, it is spectacular and
mm-hmm.
shiny.
Mm-hmm.
We were very determined to give consideration to
that there had to be.
And there had to be work.
We believe that there had to be.
That there must be work that is thoughtful, that is humorous, that is reflective in more ways than one, and that is also sharp, understanding of philosophical as well as historical, political realities.
Mm-hmm.
We were also very clear that it didn't have to be this overwhelmingly masculine presence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the exhibition does foreground, even for a Chinese public, a different profile of what contemporary art is and can be within the Chinese context.
Mm.
So even, for instance, in Shanghai, we found Shanghainese artists who had been practicing for a very long time, often in registers that were, in a way, a reflection of their own autodidactic personality. There's a wonderful documentary film called Mr. Quan, Mr. Chuan by
Mao
Haijiao, a young Chinese filmmaker, a very young person, one of the youngest in the exhibition, which is a deeply meditative work on destiny, on what happens in industrial contexts, the life of an injured factory worker, a kind of meditation on a contemporary Buddhist sensibility, which is very eccentric.
Importantly, on faith.
On faith in that, and what does it mean to profess something? These are the kind of works that would, I think, be considered as discoveries even within a Chinese context.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that we were taken up, and it is something that is some of the artists in the exhibitions are part of that kind of linkages, is that a sense of mutuality that is there in contemporary Chinese artistic production. It is supposed to be, they have been there for a long time, apparently, between, this is what we gathered from our research and conversation with many people, a deep sense of mutuality and helping each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we learned from. And we were surprised how deep is that culture, and that keeps artistic production and artistic intellectual inquiry alive in the whole large number of practices in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou.
Mm-hmm.
These are the cities that we understood that this is very lively in terms of how they help each other. This is something that has informed us,
mm-hmm.
informed our interaction with our colleague Lui Tian there, and it also informed the way we develop theory opera, which every week inside the exhibition spaces, intellectual, how do you say, theory operas to be discussed a little more extensively, and the way everybody contribute to it, the way they help financially, the way they keep on bringing new ideas for each other, suggesting things, and that non-competitive, mutual, reciprocal environment,
mm-hmm.
which I think needs to be really understood
and appreciated
and talked about globally. It is not merely this what we hear continuously. Contemporary art is this I will kill each other competing environment. Not at all like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something we learned, and we have been humbled by it, and it's something that will definitely help us think about what are the possibilities of contemporary art practice in many parts of the world. I'm sure it is subterranean. This is the subterranean current that keeps so much of the practice alive.
Well, actually, this is great. Do you think this also will inform your way of working with each other within your collective, or probably it already did? I mean, we're talking about some values that probably already informed your group.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, like you said, like Professor Lu said that we sense this more because we are a collective already.
Yeah.
I think that's also part of it. I think that working together for so many years and doing things in which you know that there has to be mutuality. We do not produce work or anything or text or whatever it might be that is not collectively formulated in some form or the other.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from that sense of a deeper swirl, of acknowledging a deeper swirl in between each other as opposed to embodied in each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that because one is lived by that, perhaps one is, as Professor Lu, who has done a theory opera, fantastic.
Professor Lu Xinhua.
Professor Lu Xinhua, who's based in Shanghai and Hangzhou, he said that maybe that's why you're more sensitive to it, and
mm-hmm.
he could be right.
No, he was very sure about it. That we read something that he sensed is there deeply, and it is not work-centric in a sense that it is not about an artist's work.
Yeah.
It's about the way the life world of an artist is shaped. So that is something that and that is, I think, Shanghai Biennale is informed by that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way we looked at the artists, the way we moved with the artists, was shaped at some level by this ethic that we found there.
Mm-hmm. And which echoes with what we think is valuable in any
case.
And
the way they help each other. There is censorship, there is serious constrictions of possibilities of production, like anywhere else. And it's much harder sometimes. But they are able to navigate it with much deeper reading. Like there's the artist Mao Chen-yu in this, which was a very important install of this show. And Mao Chen-yu's work is like 15 years. He has been continuously making, from age of 20, he's making films. He runs a paddy field. He does experimental rice making. He does rice growing. He
makes rice wine.
Great rice wine, which is like a grappa, which is 52%, which is there in the show, and which is gifted to many of the artists by him. So his work, the kind of he just does little design, little here and there to sustain as an artistic practice. But the kind of help and the kind of intellectual friendship that he holds with the artistic community is remarkable. And one of the infra-curatorial project, Louis Tian, is which he called the Ghost Hunter, basically rethinking the whole paddy field archive. And together with Mao Chen-yu, they created an incredibly beautiful and arresting install. So I think this kind of acts, which we found in the artist community, has entered the practice in the Biennale.
And speaking of infra-curatorial aspect of the exhibition, is also sort of, in a way, hinting to that, in the sense that we've invited 7 curators of, you would say that, like, you could broadly say the next generation. People we have incoming generation, people whom we have actually in some form or the other connected with. Either we have taught them, or they have curated us, or we have had conversation with them in the studio, some form of connection or the other with all of the 7. And we invited them to sort of, we use the word epiphytic when we discuss it. Epiphytic, as you know, like orchids are epiphytes on other trees. Unlike parasites, epiphytes live off another plant, but don't at all destroy the plant, just make it more beautiful by their presence. So they need the larger tree to grow, but they create a certain kind of beauty, and they allow for more circulation of pollen because they invite more bees and so on. So it's a mutually productive relationship. So we have used the word epiphyte for sort of this concept, but it is about asking 7 people to interpose themselves within the exhibition, or we have asked them to think of ideas which we have then discussed, debated, agreed, pushed, and then those are placed within the exhibition. When you're within an infra-curatorial project, it will say so very clearly, but at the same time, there are no walls, there are no separate, this is this exhibition, this is that exhibition. It's all part of the same flow in that sense. Although it's also very clear, because it will say, this is this and this is vice. And different curators have addressed, addressed formally and conceptually different things. So like Jeebesh said, Liu Qian has worked with one artist, Mao Chen-yu, to sort of open out the whole idea of the paddy film archive and the relationship between the past and the present as he's looking at, architecturally and emotively that is happening in present-day China, but also sensorially with the rice and the rice wine. So it's a kind of a very intense engagement with one artist, while someone like Smooth has worked with eight artists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, eight artists and one collective, and that is spread on every floor of the exhibition. So different curators. Sabi Ahmed, who has worked with one person's work who has passed away, but he has transformed. This is someone called Habik Chin, who was an artist in Hong Kong in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, who has passed away now. But besides his own practice, he was an obsessive documenter, photographer of any cultural events or anything that was happening in Hong Kong. So what we have is a kind of form that has been worked on by the architects of the exhibition, Rupali and Prasad, to make something which you can go and see, like each and every picture if you want to, but also in its own entirety gives you an image of the entire archive, of the image of the archive as an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so each of the infra-curatorial projects has its own tonality.
So I think that this idea of always reconsidering things and asking again, it's an attitude that you were saying, Monica, at the beginning. So I wanted to know which are the questions that probably were raising during this experience that you will keep on reflecting on, if you have some. What would you ask again?
Asking again is, first of all, a meta question. It's a question about questions. So
Yeah.
in the first instance, it's we have described it elsewhere. Monica had said that it is an antidote to the illusion of inevitability.
To the poison of inevitability.
To the poison of inevitability.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the sense that I think we tend to live in a world where people think, the election of Donald Trump is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
So, if that is inevitable, then how do you respond to that? How do you unpack that assertion of that this is what it is? So, one of the roles that art, we believe, plays is to actually foreground not the inevitable, but the possible, or the desirable, or the questionable, or the laughable. So all the different ways in which we can protect ourselves from the poison of inevitability.
I wanted to show you this. This is the guidebook of the exhibition.
Yeah.
It has many things, including the orbits, but here it says 22 questions for the... And actually, these were 22 questions that we wrote during the process of the exhibition, both to keep ourselves sort of active and sensitive to what we were paying attention to, in a way that you can pay attention to something without necessarily knowing what you're being attentive to, right? You can be looking at something and not thinking about what it is that is pulling at you and what is it that you're making connections. This was some of the questions were things like, like Jeebesh said, what does a revolt of sediments look like? Can we think of theses on gravity and lunacy? Or what happens when worlds collide? Or do archives bleed? And there were 22 such questions that we sort of spread for ourselves in the physical structure of the exhibition as well. Mm-hmm. So even when you go to the book, the questions are accompanying you as you go to the what we call the blueprint of the exhibition.
If you want to add something in particular, please do it.
Yeah, two things, because since it is recorded and once was public, two things that were two kind of the Biennale opens, and then there is two durational aspect of the exhibition goes on of the Biennale along with the exhibition. One is this what we call the 51 person, which is this every weekend. Every week, actually, not so much the weekend, you're meeting 2 to 3 people from Shanghai. 3 people from Shanghai.
Figures from the
city who has chosen the time, the place, the form by which they will interact with with the invited guest. In some cases, unlimited invited guests. In some cases, a small group. In some cases, people have to be passive to the invitation. In some cases, they have to participate in the invitation. So there is this series of things that which is one of the most fascinating discovery of the city for us, in a sense that it opened up the city as a site where people make what Monica calls artful living, in a sense that where living itself is a practice.
That distinction between art and life, you can open out and not assume that there is one, whether it's someone who's going to cook you a meal, or someone who's going to show you their candy wrapper collection, or someone who would do
exercise, the host of the city.
Yeah, or someone with whom you can go and play Go at the park. Who's at a park corner on a certain day at a certain time. Someone who can just to sit and play an afternoon for a game.
Or the reservoir,
walk along the reservoir of Shanghai. That it's hard to believe.
Like that. So that is one, and the other is the theory opera, which is in the exhibition space every week, 2 events which are basically pushing the idea of how to take a theoretical position, thinking, proposition into a plane of a performance by which you can sense it bodily, where what we call the sensational thinking. How do thinking work with us bodily? So we call it theory opera. It's a test which we inaugurated by reading the debate between Einstein and Bergson, written by Ximena Canales. She's in Harvard. She's written this book, Philosopher and the Physicist. So she has made a 3-act play for us. So we inaugurated it with that. So this 2 durational aspect of the exhibition is very crucial as it unfolds. As the exhibition unfolds, it changes its dimension.
And what about the 4 terminals then? This is something that is part of the exhibition. It's more like still. It's not evolving. It's just some, as you call them, pressure points.
Yeah, they're points of concentration, of intensity. They're also bodies of work by particular artists. So, in the sense that the terminals are like a vortex. You're not just encountering a particular work, but you're encountering a gathering of various different kinds of creative intensity that the continuing life work of an artist represents. So, for instance, one of the terminals is Regina Galindo from Guatemala.
Yeah.
And her terminal is, first of all, the exhibition architects, Rupali Gupte and Prasad Shetty, designed a kind of housing for her terminal.
No, it's a vagina.
Well, I call it a circular space.
Yeah. Once you are at its threshold, you meet a golden winged lion, which is a replica of the golden lion she won at Venice, but then traded and then made another one and so on. So she takes the consequences of art practice itself as the first body that you encounter. And then you encounter in different ways. You encounter particularly her starkness with which she confronts the world. So in one of the videos, you see her naked and you see an earth mover taking the earth literally from under her feet. So the presence of these different signals of her presence, of the way in which she inhabits the space and time of our world today, constitutes a kind of a ring of forces, we could say.
That's better.
What Jeebesh was saying, that it's a kind of revolt of the sediments of her being. So that is one term. There are other terminals which again take an artist's work and allows the artist the space to spin around the work. Marjolein Dijkman produces a pendulum, but also works with the idea of rotation, of lunacy, of the attraction of spatial bodies, of bodies in outer space, and even constructs or offers a table and chairs which during days of the exhibition become possible to sit on, but on full moon nights becomes a kind of space for a full-on conversation about physical and natural forces. So we had one which began in which you had everyone from
Okay. Thank you very much for all this.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time that we were sharing.
Thank you, Michela.